Welcome to Tattooed Freaks in Business Suits, recorded live at the Personal Touch Career Services in Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Donna Shannon, and as a professional career coach, I help people navigate the hiring maze to get to the jobs they really love. So yeah, it's true, the world of work in the U.S. is changing, especially as Gen X, millennials, and those to come after us seek positions of leadership that still allow them to be themselves. So our show's purpose is to address some of these evolutions and what that means for your own career. And of course, we're going to talk about tattoos. Our sponsor is the Personal Touch Career Services. We are Denver's top-rated career coaches. Please check out our signature Down and Dirty job search program, along with all of our resume packages at our ridiculously long website, which is personaltouchcareerservices.com. Once again, that's personaltouchcareerservices.com, or, you can just Google it. So anyways, we do have a special guest with us today. Steve Jenkins with Staff Chasers is a recruiter here in the area. And I'd love for you to introduce yourself to everybody. Steve?
Howdy, Steve Jenkins here. I founded Staff Chasers about 3 or 4 years ago. I've been a recruiter for over 30 years. I went internal for about 2.5 years. When I came back out, I revamped everything and even decided to get into a different niche as a recruiter. So we started the Staff Chasers somewhere back in 2020. So it's been a full about 4 years then.
All right. And so what's the niche industry that you're working with now?
Construction. I started many years ago, back in 1987, with a very, very large recruiting firm. Worked there for a little while, and then as life changes occurred, I segued, I think, about having been been a third-party recruiter from the very beginning. It was about 4.5 years after I started that I broke out and did it on my own.
All right. So just so our listeners are aware, differences between like an internal recruiter, a third-party recruiter, headhunters. So in terms of like our average job seeker, what would all those different things mean?
Well, an internal recruiter has a far different role than internal is very different than an external third party. Third party recruiters on the whole specialize in just a narrow niche, whereas an internal recruiter, bless their hearts, I would call them kind of the generalist recruiter, because they've got to handle a whole arc of positions. At any one time, they may have 10 different, very different positions to work on. For instance, maybe they're working on an administrative assistant, maybe they're working on a legal assistant, a programmer, software engineer, a system engineer, a network engineer. They may, so they have to divide their time up between a lot of different things. So they're really never a specialist in any one of those. Whereas a third-party recruiter normally takes a slice of the economy. In our case here, we do construction recruiting, and all we do all day long is talk to companies that either do new construction, either in commercial or multifamily, or they're doing what they call capital expenditures, or CapEx, in the multifamily, and tenant improvement in commercial. So they're taking an existing space and converting it from, say, a doctor's office to a restaurant, or a restaurant into a gym or something like that. So if somebody calls me and they're like an accountant, having been in this business such a long time, and also in the past years been the president of the recruiting association for the Rocky Mountains, I can usually send them to another specialist. If they're in construction, we can have conversations.
Okay, great. So obviously you've been involved in recruiting on the whole for quite some time. So what was it that made you get involved in recruiting? What was the draw?
I am from Wyoming originally. I busted out of college, got my degree, and went down to Texas to sell franchises, and had a ball selling franchises. And every once in a while, I'd get on the line with somebody who was a recruiter. Had a good conversation with them. Once I sold franchises, I went out and bought my own franchise. Did that for a little while. Came back to the Rocky Mountains in early '86. Took the first job I was offered, and it was actually selling photocopiers. Until getting divorced, I'd never had so much rejection. No. So the funny thing about me becoming a recruiter that day was that I just didn't want to sell photocopiers anymore. It just wasn't my cup of tea. And funny enough, I looked up the largest recruiting agency in Denver at the time and decided that I'd go in there. And I walk in to the reception area, and right there, sitting in the first seat, is my actual manager.
Mm.
He looked at me and he said, "I don't see you and you don't see me."
Right.
And so I went in there and had an interview, and the entire time that the person is interviewing me for various sales positions, I'm thinking, I'd rather do what this guy does. And so at the end of the interview, I said, with all due respect, I'd like to take a crack at being a recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "Wow, that's great. Let's have you talk to our manager." And this fella, I can tell you now, with over 30 years worth of experience in recruiting, I hear a lot of stories about bad bosses. I hear a lot of stories about abuse. I've never heard any stories that were as bad as this guy. This was a real experience for me. It tested me every day with regard to my self-esteem, and it taught me that there must be a better way to recruit. And so it was no big leap for me to say, I'm just going to start something totally on my own after I get trained. There was a little bit of time there between wanting to be on my own and having, I think, my hand sort of forced to go out on my own, because I found out one morning that I was going to be divorced. So I thought, gosh, I better do some quick thinking here if I want to see my kids. And I ended up getting most of the custody, and then 100% of the custody. But years ago, I decided if I was going to be a big part of my children's lives, I would have to do something on my own. Since I've been recruiting for, 4 or 5 years prior to that, I decided, well, I'll just do it on my own, and went out and got another house, resigned my position as a third-party recruiter in a big agency, and decided just to do it on my own.
All right.
Yeah.
So obviously you've been doing this for a while. And how do you think the recruitment has really changed in the past couple of years? I think, is there like a very clear line, like our world before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and now everything's very different?
That's a great question. The quick answer is it has changed dramatically, and I think a couple things. One of the things that has basically made it even tougher to get the right job is the ease of sending a resume without thinking about it.
Yeah.
I have to say that I think COVID did something to this world. I think that COVID changed people a little bit, and I don't know why. I kind of like to go back to the days when we did exercise some restraint and courtesy towards one another. But all in all, I think the internet has been fantastic for third-party recruiters like myself, because it enables me to really do really great research without having to go down to the library all the time.
Right.
But on the other hand, it has made it infinitely more difficult for the average candidate to find a really good job.
Really? Why do you say that?
I'm fortunate in that I do have a pretty narrow niche. I do most of my work here in Colorado with my team, and it's in construction. So I can sort of leverage my calls. the average candidate out there is competing with other candidates that are unfortunately probably sending their resume out to the same companies without being qualified. I have had candidates and other people criticize me for this, and it may hurt somebody's ears or consciousness, but if you're not 60 to 70% qualified for a position, please don't send your resume in. Here's why. It's karma. And I try to tell it in a kind of a karmic sense. When somebody says to me, I'm qualified for XYZ position. I sent my resume in and I'm not getting much of a response. I simply ask them, let me ask you, do you send your resume into a lot of companies, even though one, you may not know much about them, or two, it's not the position that you're qualified for, but you just know once they see your resume that they'll put it aside in a kind of a gold embossed place and take it out ceremoniously when that opening occurs. Listen, I apply for everything. If it's a company or anything that I'm remotely aware of, even if it's out of state and I can never move, I'll send it because they're gonna see how good I am when that perfect position opens up for me. And I said, okay, let's just remember what our parents told us. What would this world be if everybody was like me? In a sense, if you don't want your resume that you're qualified for to go unnoticed, don't send your resume in to positions you're not qualified for, because you're doing the same thing to others that you would never want them to do to you.
Yeah.
I mean, you really do have to visualize this almost in a physical sense. Imagine that resume. I know that everything's on your screen right now and you can pop it up. But if you visualize it in a more physical, tangible sense, it makes a little bit more sense. Let's say that you got your resume, that you've sent it in. You're not qualified for that position, but you just know that internal HR or talent acquisition or recruiter is going to see it and go, oh, they're not qualified for this one, but let's put this aside because I'm going to pay attention to them. That stack goes up and up and up. And God forbid that resume lands on top of somebody who is qualified. And there is fatigue. There is fatigue in recruiting. You look at 100 resumes in a day, and there's just a natural physical, mental situation that occurs, and you're going, man, I'm just so tired of looking at so many unqualified people. Not realizing that, 3/4 of the way down there, you got to keep going and you'll find that one pearl. So that's why it's another thing. Not only are so many unqualified resumes being stacked on top of yours, but they've already come out with a statistic that I think is probably pretty accurate. And this is going to anger a lot of people, but I own this company. I can piss people off.
Right.
It's really simple. At least 30% of the positions that are advertised aren't even real.
Yeah, I was reading some articles about that and kind of exploring that as well.
Yeah.
There's even now when you take into the fact that, especially for some of the higher up roles that you'll see posted on LinkedIn, depending on the source you ask, LinkedIn says 50%, Forbes said 70% of those jobs could be considered not active because they have already tapped an internal candidate or somebody presented by a recruiter, and having to go through the motions of posting the job late.
Because of all the rules and regulations.
Yeah.
So what you have, you just kind of visualize what's going on inside a company. You've got a talent acquisition or a quote recruiter or HR, bless their hearts, but they've got so many positions that they're needing to fill. And when they're asked, and here's the other secret about that, those job openings a lot of times are not coming from the internal HR or talent acquisition. They're done by the marketing department. They're doing it for name recognition, to be top of mind, and all that sort of stuff. So marketing has made a devilish impact on job, getting the right job.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to ask me about ghosting, I'm sure.
Yes, of course I am. So we see ghosting complaints on both sides, right? So for recruiters, it's candidates who ghost the interviews or they don't even show up on the first day. But also the flip side of this, I'll have you address as well. It's where job seekers have been pursued hot and heavy by a recruiter. They've been tight conversation, and all of a sudden they may have an interview with a hiring manager if they're lucky, or sometimes even before that, where they've just submitted their resume, told their resume is going to go through to the hiring manager, and then they never hear anything again, and they can't get the recruiter to engage with them anymore. So let's talk about your side first, candidates who ghost, and then let's talk about the recruiter ghosting.
Well, first part of that, let's address. Candidates who ghost me or me ghosting candidates, it's pretty rare in my little world, simply because all the jobs that we have on our website and all the jobs that I'm talking about, they're real.
Mm-hmm.
So it would do me no good to waste my time. I hate to say it that way. Let me just rephrase that. Edit that out. It would be foolish for me to utilize my time on something that is just air.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking to somebody about something that's not real, when I could be utilizing that for high caliber companies and high caliber candidates. It doesn't make any sense with a third party, because remember, many times, my firm included, we're only paid if we find the right person.
Right.
So anytime that time is something you just can't invent. You just can't scare up some more time. Every day I only have a certain amount of time to get to a certain number of people. So it's a waste of my, again, it's a bad utilization of time to do something that is not there. So ghosting does not occur near as much, because I'm not sending out emails. I'm not dialing the phone on people who I don't really care to talk to or receive information from.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, you described ghosting, I think, as an accurate portrayal. We need to stop conflating, and some people conflate. Hey, I sent my resume in, and they never called me back. Mm-hmm. If you're setting your resume in for something that you're not pretty darn qualified for, it is not ghosting when they don't contact you. What you said about having a conversation and it goes for a while and they get your information and you get their information, about, all that sort of good stuff, and either side doesn't call back or continue the conversation, that's truly ghosting. Mm-hmm. And I wish that more people would really attend to that qualification of what ghosting is.
Yeah, very true. Very
but
true.
If companies are putting out ads for situations that aren't real, I would hope that there's a special place in a different world for those types of people and those types of companies. I could name by name several companies here in Denver that do that, because I've talked to they're not clients, because when I talk to the C-level people, they're saying, hey, Steve, we can't help it. Marketing has decided to keep this as a marketing tool and not as a real effort to find good people. Mm-hmm. They're stockpiling candidates. They're just putting them in an inventory for a later rainy day.
Oh, I don't think they even go through that inventory. So when marketing is doing these strategies of Hey, we're trying to show that we are growing the business. So we're going to put some job postings out there because we're trying to look good to investors or to
Absolutely.
our customers. They're not doing anything with those resumes. They're not going to look at it later for sure.
I
Let's,
was surprised. I
yeah.
was surprised when I went internal at what you're saying. I helped start the recruiting efforts of a client of ours that I decided to go from IT to working in a totally different business in the multifamily housing industry. This
Mhm.
is a very large company. And as we added recruiters, I did notice that they were continually running ads and continually looking at candidates that would respond, but they didn't go back to the original or the original candidates that had applied weeks ago. So I don't know. It's kind of the Wild West right now.
Yeah. And the whole thing too, that I always like to point out to people with the 60 to 70% qualifications, I agree with that. But also you need to be using the right language. That's where like a lot of candidates will talk to me and they'll be like, I was totally qualified for this job. I had 80% of the qualifications and I got an instant rejection from the computer. And I'll take a look and it's all like, you didn't use the right keywords. Like, for example, the job posting said the words bachelor's degree required, and their resume said BS.
Yes,
But if
yes,
nobody
yes.
tells the computer that a BS is the bachelor's degree, they could have gotten kicked out and told that they didn't have any education.
Well,
So I don't know if you saw the study that the Wall Street was published in the Wall Street Journal, but it was done by the Harvard Business Review a
mhm.
couple of years ago. That like 95% of CEOs that are in Fortune 500 companies, they did a survey of like 700 of them. 95% of these C-suite executives knew that the applicant tracking system, the ATS, was cutting out qualified applicants. But because of the sheer volume, it's a catch 22, right? You have to
It
have a
is.
way to screen and sort the candidates, and it's a trap. It's a trap in some ways.
Well, let's go back to the average company that has internal recruiters.
Right, right. They have to use something. They can't
They
look
have
at
to use something
hundreds.
like that, and that's unfortunate. We've got a real good ATS.
Mhm.
Um, it's called Loxo, which is used for, I guess it's used internally, but a lot of recruiters use it. Um, every big company or any small company is forced to use an applicant tracking system. And the problem with that is that if they're forced to find 15 or 20 different job titles, it's immensely difficult to have your arms around all the good keywords for each one of those positions.
Oh, yeah. Literally, like when I used to recruit for IT, I don't know my Java from my mainframe from a C++, but I would have to
Yes,
react to the keywords.
yes, yes. So I'm not blaming the internal people as much as I'm saying they're victims of decisions that are beyond their control. I'll give you an example. The company that I worked for um, had an ATS that I wasn't very comfortable with because it wasn't doing what it needed to do. And as it turned out, I had still paid for my old ATS when I was doing IT recruiting. And so I brought the guy who hired me, who had never been a recruiter, into my office and I said, listen, can I show you what I can do with this position opening? It was for a maintenance
Mm.
tech. So I went to the internet, downloaded a bunch of resumes, put them into my ATS, and said, okay, listen, I want to make a call list of 50 candidates that I will call on this position. So I put the keywords into Indeed, got a bunch of resumes, put it really quickly into my ATS, and within 15 minutes had 50 people with their resumes and their contact information onto a spreadsheet. I had it printed as an Excel spreadsheet, and I had it on my desktop. I turned to my manager and I said, "How long would that take you with this system?" He said, "It would probably take me maybe 3 or 4 hours to do what you've done." And I said, "What I've done in about the last 15 minutes?" And he said, "Yeah." That was the first 3 weeks that I was at my new position. And I thought, oh boy, this is going to be rough, because they're using an ATS that doesn't serve the purpose of finding good people very quickly and getting them into a face-to-face or a phone conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if you're forced, I mean, hey, when they're paying the bills and you're forced to, they say jump, you have to say how high. So I did that until I couldn't jump for 2.5 years. And then I decided, well, I'm going to just go back to doing what I used to do and do something on my own.
Okay, well, let's talk a little bit more about your recruitment efforts. So, when you're sourcing people, do you really like to do the open job market approach where you're like actively posting positions like on Indeed or LinkedIn? Or do you tap into like a hidden job market where you're reaching out to passive candidates?
About 99% of my recruiting efforts are towards passive candidates. So I've got a very, very large database of candidates. Within the construction industry, it's rare now that I come across too many people in a day's time or a week's time that I don't already have in my database. I've invested very heavily in certain software programs that give me their title, their email address, hopefully their cell phone address. I don't run very many ads, but I talk to a ton of people every day. And that, again, is something that you can't possibly do within the context of being an internal recruiter, because if you've got 10, let's just say 5 different positions, it's really difficult to go out there and find passive candidates. My main thing is that we find candidates who are very qualified, not reading want ads, and need to be professionally approached. So I haven't used Indeed for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I used it for a while, because when I broke away from the company, I still was doing like maintenance techs. In the multifamily housing industry, but I didn't use it for very long, because it came to me that I'd rather be doing the large projects in construction. I still do it, but in the multifamily housing sense, I don't do the maintenance techs as much as I used to.
Right. So, in that case, what makes a strong candidate in your eyes? What are you looking for?
We call it an MPC, or a most placeable candidate, and it usually comes down to somebody who within a certain reasonable amount of time can show that they've been either able to reduce a cost or increase the benefits of a company. And that's one of the things that I believe a lot of candidates need to perhaps work on a daily basis at their present companies, and that is, what am I actually doing to increase the profits here, or reduce the expenses of this company, or how am I doing both? If somebody on their resume shows that I had this title, these are my duties and responsibilities, and this is the difference between when I started and when I ended, those are the people that I go after. Somebody who can show me that when they started, they were down here with productivity, and now they're somewhere above that.
That's what I tell candidates all the time. It's like, if you want the phone to ring, you need to tell them how you make money, save money, or solve problems.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think people
So,
freak out about like pure achievements, but now what we're talking about a lot as resume writers is about impact. And that
yeah,
sounds
what
like
does that
what you're
mean?
talking about too.
Absolutely. Yeah, duties, titles, and responsibilities, they look good, but at the end of the day, what does that mean? And the secret that I give candidates when they go in for an interview is, you know, the tried and true method of telling people what you did, how you did it, but don't stop there.
Mm-hmm.
What you also have to do is say, this is how I made the company more money, or sometimes even better, this is how I enriched the hiring authority's time, or how I made my hiring authority, my manager, look really, really good.
Mm-hmm.
Because the person at the other end of the table, when they're interviewing you, subconsciously or consciously, they're thinking, if I hire this person, am I going to be lauded by everybody within the kingdom as an incredible chooser of talent, or am I going to be the village idiot? And unfortunately, candidates don't think about that. They want to talk about what they accomplished and stop there. And what I think they really ought to do is tell the hiring authority what that accomplishment actually meant for their past bosses.
Yeah, I like to think of it as the so what factor.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I think that's a good way of looking at it.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about some of the downside things. So, like, are there certain actions or things that a candidate might do to get them knocked out of the running, even if they have all the qualifications? Like maybe rude behavior, overstepping their bounds, not engaging. Any real big red flags you see?
I think it's a rare occasion where you can be a real backside and brilliant at your job and maintain your job for very long. We all have instances. I do believe that they're kind of outliers, that somebody is just a savage to work with, but they're so brilliant that they keep them on. There's got to be this balance, I think, between being really good at your job and treating people with respect.
Yeah.
And I do think that there's, I mean, there's so many ways to screw up. I do it every day. It's unintentional. Did I call somebody too early? That may have put them off. Does a candidate, man, you just never know. Cursing is probably never a good thing. I mean, it's a safe bet that you should probably don't use off-color language, talk too much in political terms, or rail against some class or group of people.
Yeah, do watch what you say on social media if you're in a job search.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned that, because when Facebook first came out, my kids are now 39 and 35. So they were right at the beginning of this Facebook thing. Thank goodness they were at the beginning, and they're not in it right now. But I did tell them, I think they were probably out of the house. Yeah, they were pretty much out of the house by the time it was really full blown. I told them I told them straight up, whatever you do, if somebody has a cell phone, they have a camera. So whatever you do in front of people, you got to know that somebody may be taking a picture of you. And don't be making gestures at a party. Just maintain. That has, I'm so glad you bring that up, because it is social media. We're all victims and volunteers in this whole game of social media. Really watch what you say, because you don't know who's reading it. I mean, when I was in the multifamily housing industry, it was not at all uncommon, and I can say this because I think it's true. I saw far too many like property managers, maintenance techs, or whatever, talk really down about their own company or name somebody. And I would look at that and thinking, my gosh, in some instances that never goes away. Even when you delete a comment, I mean, if you're going to be up on, my mom is not a rocket scientist, but for some reason she's got some pretty good common sense. When this emailing started coming out in social media, she said, you know, Steve, the way I look at it is, it's not like you can type something out or write something out in a letter and you can chase the postman down.
Right.
You can chase him down
Yeah.
and say, please give me that. I didn't mean to say something. Could you give it back? I mean, you could dive into his mailbag maybe and take the letter out. You can't do that on social media. It leaves a trail. It leaves a track, and it will go. It will haunt you for just. We used to think that our high school records were daunting. They're nothing. They're nothing compared to what you say on social media.
Yeah. Yeah. So I know we've talked some about don't apply for a position if you're not qualified for it. But say you're wanting to break into a new industry. What
Sure.
kind of tips or tricks would you suggest for somebody who wanted to make a career change?
You know, I would take, not to be glib or anything, but I would take a deep cleansing breath and think, what industries do I kind of get excited about? And way back when somebody would ask me, well, I'm not exactly sure what I want to do with my life. Believe it or not, when Yellow Pages were still around, I would say, go get the Yellow Pages and just flip through the pages. It starts somewhere around abdominal supports and ends with something that starts with a Z. But just flip through that and let your mind wander about, can I do this? Who's involved in that? If I can't sell that product or work within that product, what does that product or service serve? Could I get excited about that? If you're going to break into a new industry, I would say try to find something that's tangential to what you're already doing. A project coordinator. Let's say that you're a project coordinator in a I don't know, a law firm. You know, you're probably not dealing with construction, but it's not that far away. You know, you're managing or coordinating something for other people. Look into all the project coordinating that you could do for different industries. One of the, I can't remember what basketball player said it. Maybe it was Wilt Chamberlain. Life is short, but it's also very broad. And I think people don't give themselves enough credit for what they could do elsewhere. And that may seem to go counter to what I'm saying about don't apply for a job that you're not qualified for. It's a relative thing. Project coordinator here could be a project coordinator there. You might want to think, okay, who do I report to in my job? Could I do that job? Why don't I apply for that kind of job? Because it might be the next step in your career where you are right now. It could very well be the next step in your career at somewhat of a tangential industry.
I do like helping people with career pivots that are making use of their transferable skills and things
Sure.
they've already
Sure.
done. And the nice thing too, though, is you can look through these jobs that you're interested in. You can see the skills that you're missing, and it's very easy to upskill these days and start adding to that without expecting a company to train you and everything. You'll still have some training necessary when you get on the job, of course.
Oh, sure.
But
Absolutely.
you got to do something to at least show that you're serious about the pivot.
I'm so glad that you mentioned taking training and not having it be paid for by the company.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of impressive things about a candidate, one of which is when you look at a certificate that they got or some sort of training that they willfully decided, I'm not going to go out and play. I'm going to take this training, and I'm not going to ask my employer to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm sure you've run across this, Donna. Somebody will say to me or you, I don't need that certificate. In fact, the last time somebody with, you can name all sorts of certificates, came in here, I ran circles around them, and they're making more money than I am.
Mm-hmm.
And I just simply asked them, how much do you think that certificate costs? Well, it probably costs $1,000.
Mm-hmm.
How much more do you think they make than you? I know they make at least $5,000 or $7,000 or $10,000 more. And I say, so somewhere in here's an ego.
Mm-hmm.
And they know where I'm going with this.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that you're not willing to pay $1,000 to make 10,000 when you see that the person that has it is making more than you.
Yeah.
And it should be a very easy certificate. If you're that good, if you're that much better than them, you should be able to ace that baby.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So any other special advice or words of encouragement for people out there who are looking?
The job market is not as bad as some of the mainstream media says. I honestly don't think it is. What I find now, I'm not an expert in much of anything, but in the construction industry, look around, there's cranes all over Denver. There are jobs out there. How do you make somebody sit up and pay attention to your existence? Find out what you're good at. Find a great recruiter that's in your niche, because they're the fastest way. Because right now, if I was to look into my computer, I've got tens of thousands of candidates in my computer. I've got probably 10,000 companies in my computer. There's a lot of opportunity out there, but you're going to have to put in some work to find what's best for you. My older brother was extremely successful in the writing world. He led expeditions. He first across Russia on his mountain bike, worked for National Geographic, been on the top of Kilimanjaro, Mount Everest. He summited Mount Everest. He and I were climbing years ago. I think I'd only been a recruiter for probably about 10 years at that time. We're right in the middle of a very scary climb out in Wyoming. And he says, the way I look at it, you sleep a certain amount of hours a day, you work a certain amount of hours a day, and then of course you have to sleep. You really should really enjoy who you play with and who you work with. And I think that's just good folksy wisdom. There are jobs out there that you can get. Have faith in yourself. You can have fun. You can really have fun in these jobs. But it's just not going to be handed to you. When I look at all the resumes, I look at a lot of resumes constantly, and I wonder, did this person take this job? Because it doesn't make a lot of sense. How did they get from here to there? Mm-hmm. I just wonder how many people sit down and think about, what do they really want to accomplish with their hours? I think far too many candidates and people sort of drift along and get opportunity. They may or may not get a raise, not depending on what they actually were going after, but maybe out of attrition. I think it really comes down to figure out what you really kind of want to do and figure out how to get there. And you can't really expect companies to come looking at you if you're not popping your head up every once in a while and being aware of their existence when they call you or reaching out to them.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So now we get to come to one of my favorite parts of the show, where we get to talk about the tattoo of the day.
Okay, let me roll up my sleeves and show you how many tattoos I have.
Yeah, I was going to say, Steve,
I don't have any.
You don't have any tattoos.
But I do. I have a niece that's a tattoo artist
Well, there we go.
down in the Springs, and I have two tattoos in mind. One of them is the honey badger. The honey badger to me exemplifies, and we're trying to figure out how to put it on our logo now. But the honey badger exemplifies to us indefatigable energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we look at ourselves as recruiters as we're going to figure out a way to help companies. We're going to figure out a way to help candidates accentuate their careers and build companies. We're going to find something that we can do for a company. And we're not going to stop until we've tried everything. Now, do they want our help at the end of the day? Maybe not. But we're just not going to stop until they basically tell us, listen, we're never, ever going to hire you to find good people. That's great. The other one is a little bit more funny. It's I'm married to a woman from Iran. There's a word in Iran, in Persian, it's ejdaha, it means dragon. Her personality is a little bit more calm than mine. And I think what she's hinting at is that sometimes I act like a little dragon.
No.
So, yeah.
I can definitely support a good dragon tattoo. I have a few of those.
Do you really? Do
Yeah.
you? Well, tell me, how old were you when you got your first tattoo, and what did it signify, if I'm not getting too personal?
Oh, okay. So my very first tattoo I got illegally. I was 17 and a half. You're not allowed to get tattoos until you're 18.
Oh,
But okay, so that was like a little bit weird because I was already married at that point. So
you were married at 17?
yes, I was still in high school. So I finished high school pregnant and married. Yes. And it was the 80s, okay? So it's not like they gave people TV shows to teen moms back then. They didn't.
Wow, congratulations.
Yeah, so the first tattoo I got, it's actually a tarot card. It's the tower from a deck that was all cat themed. And
Okay.
so if you don't know anything about tarot, my main interpretation of that card is spiritual growth through total destruction, which kind of, okay, that makes sense. And then I had that covered up back in 1999 with a phoenix, which is a very similar meaning.
Up from the ashes sort of thing?
Yeah, rising from the ashes. So,
Okay.
it is spiritual growth after destruction, but it's more like the positive side afterwards. So,
Okay.
there you go. Anyway,
Well,
that is our time. Thank you very, very
Sure.
much for joining me
You
today,
bet.
Steve. So, how can people find you?
Well, our website is www.staffchasers.com.
Mm-hmm.
My email is steve@staffchasers.com. And my LinkedIn is Stephen Jenkins, CPC.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Everybody, if you like what you heard, please be sure to give us a like, maybe leave a comment, and definitely follow us. If you didn't like what you heard, please just keep it to yourself. The world is full enough.
No, bring them on. I want to know how I can improve.
All right. Well, thanks again, Steve. And everybody else, this has been Tattooed Freaks in Business Suits. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Tattooed Freaks in Business Suits, produced by the Personal Touch Career Services. Our host is Donna Shannon. All music has been ethically sourced and licensed from sounddogs.com and epidemicsound.com. Support the arts. We certainly do. Join us next time as we continue to explore the evolving world of work and leadership in the United States. If you are interested in being a guest, or if you would like to receive a complimentary career evaluation, please visit the contact page at personaltouchcareerservices.com. Once again, that's personaltouchcareerservices.com. Or you can just Google it.